She thought it was just an old tool shed, rusted hinges, warped siding, and decades of dust. But when Grace Turner's boot cracked through the floorboards, what she uncovered beneath wasn't rot, it was reinforced steel. And below that, a staircase that hadn't seen light in over 40 years. What began as a weekend cleanup spiraled into a hidden government facility, a forgotten past, and a secret that someone might still be watching. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this make your heart race, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story, let's just say this one, sets the stage for it. The wind in Dry Hollow had a way of carrying secrets. It whispered through the dying pines, stirred the dust along cracked county roads, and howled through forgotten places like the rusted-out shed that now stood at the edge of Grace Turner's inheritance. The locals didn't speak much about the property. Most didn't even know it had an owner. But when Grace pulled up in her dented pickup with a clipboard, a thermos of gas station coffee, and zero expectations, the place greeted her like a ghost waiting to be noticed. The shed sat crooked on its foundation, its corrugated metal walls streaked with red dust and decay. The door hung loose on one hinge, swaying slightly in the breeze. Grace stepped out, boots crunching on brittle weeds, and approached with the kind of curiosity she'd inherited from her father, a man who never walked past a locked door without wondering what was behind it. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a line in her late uncle's will, one parcel of land and structures thereon. She figured she'd find an old tractor, maybe some rusted tools. The shed itself looked like it hadn't been opened in 20 years. The padlock was broken, the latch rusted solid. She gave the door a tug, and it screeched open like something out of a low-budget horror movie. Inside, it smelled of dust and oil. A single fluorescent light flickered weakly overhead, casting a pale glow over old workbenches, coiled wires, and rows of silent tools. Everything was coated in a fine layer of desert grit. Grace stepped in slowly, flashlight in hand, sweeping across forgotten buckets, a wall of faded Polaroids, and a calendar pinned to the back wall, July 1979. She took a breath, deep and dry. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Kneeling beside the far wall, she pried open a metal storage chest, revealing maps, technical manuals, and a broken shortwave radio with USAF scratched into its side. That was the first moment her instincts flared. A military radio? In an old desert shed? She stood up and turned, and that's when the floor gave way. There was no warning. Just the sound of splintering wood and a jolt of panic as her right foot crashed through the boards. Dust exploded into the air, and for one breathless second, she thought she was going to fall straight through. But she caught herself on a support beam, heart hammering, flashlight tumbling into the hole below. It didn't land on dirt. Grace, coughing, peered down into the darkness. Her flashlight had landed on a metal surface. Not just that the beam revealed clean, sharp edges, seams, and something else. A welded hatch. A blast door. She stared at it, breath shallow. There was something beneath this shed. Something built hidden and never meant to be found. And now, it was hers. Grace didn't move right away. She just knelt beside the ragged hole, staring into the dust-lit shaft like she'd stumbled onto the edge of a secret too big to name. Her flashlight beam wavered as particles settled in the air, casting shifting shadows across the metal surface below. The hatch was unmistakably man-made. Reinforced steel, bolted. And not just some old septic tank or storage bunker. This was industrial. Military, even. Still catching her breath, she rose slowly, testing the edges of the cracked floor with her boots. Half of the shed's planks were brittle enough to crumble under weight. She stepped carefully backward, snatched an old iron pry bar off the workbench, and cleared away the surrounding boards until the full outline of the hatch revealed itself. It was rectangular, about 6 feet long, flush with concrete that definitely hadn't been poured by a casual handyman. There were no markings on the door itself, no labels, no warnings, just a faint outline where a control panel used to be. But what really caught her eye was the seam clean, and even, with just enough space to suggest it opened vertically. It wasn't a hatch for storage. It was an entrance. She climbed down into the hollow with effort, her boots scraping against a few old support beams that had buckled under time. Dust clung to her jeans as she crouched in front of the hatch and ran her fingers along its surface. It was cold, even in the desert heat. Grace exhaled, then looked up at the shed above the light still flickering uselessly. A metal shed, a military radio, and now a sealed subterranean hatch. Something about it prickled the back of her neck. This wasn't a coincidence. Her uncle never mentioned this place in life. Just a quiet, unceremonious line in his will. For Grace. She climbed back up and moved fast, instincts kicking in. She grabbed gloves, a crowbar, and the socket wrench set she kept in her truck. Then she returned to the hatch, with focused urgency. The bolts had rusted in place, but under pressure, one by one, they began to turn. Every clunk of metal echoed through the pit like a countdown. By the time the last bolt came free, night had begun to fall outside the shed. The only light now came from her lantern, and the cold steel beneath her hands. With a final grunt, she braced the crowbar against the seam and pried. The hatch hissed. Not loud, just a faint release of pressure, like something had been sealed airtight for a very long time. A draft of cold air rushed out, smelling like metal, old oil, and earth. Then the hatch gave way with a mechanical clunk, swinging open to reveal a narrow metal staircase disappearing into darkness. Grace stood at the edge, lantern in hand, her heart thudding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This wasn't just buried history. This was something someone went to great lengths to hide. And now she was standing on the threshold not of a shed, not even of a bunker, but of a secret. Someone never thought would be found. Grace descended slowly, each step creaking under her weight as the staircase dipped below ground level and swallowed her in silence. The air was cooler here still, dry and unshaken by the decades. Her lantern cast a tight circle of light, revealing metal walls on both sides, ribbed with conduit and dull with layers of dust. Every sound, her breath, her boots, the faint squeak of the handrail echoed off the steel like ghosts repeating her every move. The staircase ended at a small platform, no wider than a closet, with a sealed bulkhead door directly in front of her. It looked like something torn from the side of a submarine, thick, riveted, and unmistakably military. A faded label stenciled on the steel was barely readable beneath grime. But she could make out fragments, property of the United States Air. And beneath that, in flaked red, Level 1 control access. She knelt down, wiped the lower portion with her sleeve. There was a keycard reader, long dead. No keypad, no lock, just a smooth black sensor panel cracked with age. Great, she muttered. Now what? Grace leaned back against the railing, heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the discovery. Her mind raced. If this was military, and it clearly was, then there had to be an access point. Somewhere. She retraced her steps up the stairs, climbed back out into the shed, and this time turned her attention to the back wall, the one lined with faded papers, old manuals, and pinned photographs. Most were curling with age, yellowed at the edges, and pinned loosely to a corkboard streaked with water damage. That's when she saw it. An old dog tag, hanging from a thumbtack by a thin rusted chain. It dangled beside a photo black and white, grainy of 3 men in flight suits standing beside a corrugated hangar, one of whom looked familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. Beneath the photo, someone had scribbled in pen, Moffett Field, 1973. She pulled the tag free and flipped it over. Name? Turner? John R. ID? 024 719 1984. Blood type O+. Grace froze. Turner. Her father's name had been John Robert Turner. But he'd never mentioned the military. Never talked about bases or tags or hidden bunkers. Beneath the ID number, scratched into the aluminum with what looked like a nail, was a 6-digit code. 4, 7, 9, 6, 3, 1. Her pulse quickened. She climbed back down into the hatch, tag clutched in one hand, and held it over the keypad. Nothing happened. But then, following instinct, she tapped the numbers on the sensor panel. 4, 7, 9, 6, 3, 1, and held her breath. A soft click echoed behind the bulkhead door. Then a hiss, then movement. The door shifted slowly, dust raining from the ceiling as gears groaned to life for the first time in decades. Inch by inch, the sealed bulkhead opened inward, revealing a long corridor bathed in faint blue light from emergency strips along the floor. Beyond the threshold lay a hallway lined with cables, pipes, and reinforced doors. She stepped through, and the door sealed shut behind her with a clang. The air inside the corridor was heavier not just with dust, but with time. Grace could feel it pressing in around her, dense and unmoving, like this place hadn't breathed in 40 years. The emergency lighting along the base of the walls flickered weakly, casting a cold blue hue across peeling paint and wires that coiled like dormant snakes. Her boots left prints in the dust, marking a trail that hadn't been crossed since long before she was born. She moved slowly, lantern sweeping side to side. Each door she passed was sealed tight, labeled with stenciled numbers. B2, B3, B4. Each one bore the same rusting handle and the same triangular, authorized personnel only. Warning, faded but legible. This wasn't just some fallout shelter or doomsday hideout. It had been something operational, organized, purpose-built. Halfway down the hall, she found a control panel, old but intact, embedded into the wall. It had a screen, blank, and a row of push buttons worn smooth from use. At the bottom, a small card slot was inset beneath a broken plastic shield. Grace crouched in front of it, uncertain what she was looking for. The dog tag? The code? She tapped the screen. Nothing. She pressed a few buttons. Nothing. Then, following a hunch, she pulled the dog tag from her pocket and held it up to the card slot. Nothing. Frustrated, she leaned back against the opposite wall and stared at the ceiling. "Why give me the code if it only opens the door?" she muttered. Then she looked at the panel again specifically, the bolts holding its faceplate in place. She pulled out her multi-tool and got to work. One by one, the screws came loose. Behind the plate, the circuitry was primitive green boards, thick wiring, and a small backup battery unit blinking red. And behind that, tucked between the circuit board and the panel casing, was something unexpected. A folded sheet of paper, sealed in a Ziploc bag. Grace's hands trembled as she pulled it free and unzipped it. It was a handwritten memo, dated the 6th of July 1980, signed at the bottom with a name she didn't recognize. Colonel Michael Thorne. The message was short. "If this system fails, initiate manual sequence 47E. Use Turner's code. Vault access only. Remember, the system will recognize DNA first. If you're reading this, you're either family or you shouldn't be here at all." She read it twice. "Vault access?" she repeated aloud. "DNA recognition?" The implication sent a chill down her spine. This place, this whole underground facility had been programmed to respond to her. Not just the code her father left behind, but something deeper, biological, intentional. She stepped back from the panel, pulse racing, and turned down the corridor again. If there was a vault, and a reason her father embedded his code into this place, it would be further in, beyond the sealed doors, beyond the dust. And somewhere in that silence was the answer to a question she didn't even know how to ask yet. The corridor bent slightly to the left, the air colder the farther Grace walked. Somewhere above her, buried beneath layers of Nevada sandstone and forgotten bureaucracy, the surface world kept moving. But down here, the clocks had stopped. Time was held in suspension, and now Grace was walking through a past that had clearly been left sealed on purpose. At the far end of the hallway, the corridor terminated in a thick vault door, round like a submarine's. with a faded red stripe painted across the middle and a stencil that read, Vault 1. A clearance level 4 required. Grace stared at it, dog tag still clutched in her palm. This wasn't like the first hatch. This one wasn't just bolted, it was locked by some kind of biometric mechanism. The panel to the right blinked softly, still drawing minimal power from whatever backup system kept this place alive. There was a small square labeled Scan, and beneath it, a cracked warning, retinal or DNA match only. Security override disabled. She whispered under her breath. Okay, Dad, whatever you left down here, I hope it was worth it. Grace hesitated only a moment before placing her palm on the panel. Nothing happened. Then she remembered the memo. The system will recognize DNA first. She glanced around, searching her jacket pocket, until she found the small cut she'd gotten earlier, a scrape across her knuckle from the crowbar when prying open the hatch. She took a breath, pressed the dried blood against the scanner, and waited. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the panel beeped one long tone. The lights on the wall brightened. A small mechanical whir kicked in, and with a grinding thunk, the vault door unsealed. Steam hissed from hidden vents. Grace instinctively stepped back as the massive door slowly pivoted open on unseen hinges. Behind it, darkness yawned deeper and colder than anything she'd seen yet. She lifted her lantern again and stepped inside. It wasn't a room. It was a chamber. 2 stories tall, circular, and lined with consoles, cabinets, and dusty equipment racks. A spiral staircase ran along the wall to a grated catwalk above. And at the center of the room, lit by a single flickering overhead bulb, stood a desk and an old military terminal, built into a steel housing that looked too advanced for the 1,980 seconds, yet too analog to be modern. Grace crossed the threshold, the sound of her boots echoing across the chamber, and approached the terminal. The screen was dark. She reached forward and flipped the only switch she could find, a toggle marked Main System Power Engage. The terminal hummed. Lights blinked to life along the housing. And then, slowly, a screen glowed blue and began to type by itself. Welcome, Grace Turner. Access granted. She blinked. The screen paused for a moment, then loaded a new line. He knew you'd come. Her knees weakened slightly. She sat down hard in the chair, staring at those words. Somewhere in this bunker, someone had known she would find this place. Someone had waited. And now, the system was waking up not because of an accident, but because the daughter of someone buried in history had finally come home. Grace sat frozen before the glowing screen, its quiet hum the only sound in the room. The terminal didn't prompt her to type. It didn't ask for input. It simply waited, pulsing gently like a heartbeat in steel and circuitry. She reached for the keyboard anyway, fingers hovering, uncertain. Who? She typed, hands trembling slightly. Nothing happened. Then, after several long seconds, the screen blinked, and a new line appeared. Data corruption. Archival mode enabled. Loading. Primary log index. Subject, file 1. John R. Turner debrief. Redacted. Her heart caught in her chest. She hit enter. The screen went black. Then a series of green-coded lines began to scroll, slow and staggered, like a message trying to cross through decades of silence. Then static flickered. A video feed. It was grainy, black and white. A man sat at the desk Grace now occupied, wearing a uniform that looked unfamiliar, but official. No name tag, no insignia she recognized. His face was lean, slightly weathered, with deep-set eyes that felt impossible not to recognize. Her throat tightened. It was her father. He looked younger, late 30s, maybe with hair darker than she remembered, and eyes that didn't yet carry the weight she'd seen in his final years. The video clicked into audio. If you're watching this, he said, voice rough, tired, then I'm either dead or circumstances are worse than anyone wanted. Grace leaned closer. My name is John Turner. I served with the 42nd Black Echo Division, unofficial of course. If you've never heard of it, good. That means we did our job. But if this facility has been accessed, it means our containment failed. Or someone opened the wrong door. He paused, as if weighing every word. This bunker isn't a weapons cache. It's not for storage or evacuation. It's a signal lock. Underneath this facility is a relay system, buried cables, Cold War-era amplifiers, long-range burst transmitters. It was designed to jam or direct. We never got a clear answer. They called it Red Echo. He glanced over his shoulder, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. We didn't build it. We found it. The military retrofitted this structure in '63 after a geological survey team stumbled onto a man-made chamber, buried deep beneath this region, far older than any mapping showed. No one could agree where it came from. Some said Soviet. Others didn't guess. Grace's blood turned cold. We were tasked with one thing: keep the signal contained. Whatever was transmitting down there, whatever frequency it sat on, it wasn't ours. And it wasn't dead. The screen fizzled, then cut to black. The terminal blinked, then returned to a static prompt. Log ended. Secondary access tunnel. Unlocked. Proceed with caution. Across the chamber, something shifted. A low clang, then the soft hiss of hydraulic locks releasing. A panel near the far wall slid open to reveal another tunnel. This one narrow, unlit, descending farther into the earth. Grace stood slowly, every instinct in her body torn between retreat and curiosity. But something her father said, "We didn't build it," rang in her ears like a warning. And yet, her feet moved forward. She picked up the lantern, stepped through the sliding panel, and entered the silent tunnel that had waited for her for over 40 years. The tunnel narrowed the deeper Grace walked, the walls changing from smooth military steel to something older, rougher, carved. The difference wasn't just visual. She could feel it in the air. The further she descended, the more unnatural the silence became. Even the sound of her footsteps dulled, as if the stone itself swallowed noise. Her lantern flickered. This wasn't part of the original structure. The construction shifted from precision engineering to raw excavation. Conduits still lined the walls, but they twisted and bent at odd angles, like they'd been forced to follow a path someone hadn't designed, only discovered. 100 feet in, she reached a junction. 2 doors. One was labeled simply, Storage B. The other was more ominous. Room 17. Authorized eyes only. The words were stenciled in red. And below them, a smaller etched line had been scratched directly into the steel. Do not open alone. Grace's hand hovered over the latch, her breath fogged in the cold. The door to room 17 was heavy, the kind that felt like it didn't want to move unless it had a reason. She pressed her shoulder into it, and with a metallic groan, it creaked open. The light from her lantern spilled inside. The room was circular, low-ceilinged, and completely silent. Dust hung thick in the air, but nothing here was abandoned. It had been preserved. Along the walls were file cabinets, a table with scattered documents, and an old metal chair bolted to the center of the floor, facing a large, circular pane of glass embedded in the far wall like a viewing window. But what was on the other side stopped her cold. Beyond the glass was a chamber pitch black, save for faint red lights glowing from unseen machinery. At the center, barely illuminated, stood a tall, cylindrical object 8 feet high, black as coal, ribbed like a cocoon or a pressure chamber. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't wired to anything. It just was. Grace stepped closer, nearly pressing her forehead against the glass. The thing inside, it wasn't new. Dust clung to its base, but something about it made her skin crawl. Like it shouldn't be here. Like nothing built by people ever looked that. Still, she turned to the desk and found a file folder half open, pages yellowed and brittle. Inside were faded photographs, blurry shots of the object in different lighting, and one with men in hazmat suits standing several feet away, weapons trained on it. No annotations, no notes, just the number, 17 to 001. Grace flipped through the rest of the folder. Most of the documents were redacted, thick black lines covering entire paragraphs. But one note, handwritten and barely legible, stood out. Echo patterns increased post-sealing. Recommend vault expansion halted until further review. Device not dormant. Emits at 6.1-second intervals. Hypothesis, not man-made. Grace reread the last line 3 times. Not man-made. She turned back toward the glass. The object inside hadn't moved. It didn't need to. Just looking at it felt like trespassing. And then softly her lantern flickered again. The red lights inside the sealed chamber blinked once. Grace stepped back instinctively. Then the room's only overhead speaker crackled to life. Grace. A voice. Male. Calm. Familiar. You shouldn't be here. But if you're hearing this, it's already listening. The speaker went dead. She stood frozen. In the stillness of room 17, Grace realized something terrifying. The shed, the hatch, the vault. None of it had been about keeping people out. It was about keeping something else in. Grace didn't run, not yet, but every part of her wanted to. She stepped back from the glass slowly, heart thudding in her throat, watching the blinking red lights as if they might change again. They didn't. The object in the chamber remained still, lifeless. But she couldn't shake the feeling that stillness wasn't the same as dormancy. Whatever it was, it had heard her name. The voice on the speaker had been male, calm, intentional. It hadn't been a glitch or garbled audio. It was someone speaking now. And somehow, whoever or whatever it was, knew she was here. Grace backed toward the door, nearly tripping over the chair bolted to the center of the room. She didn't notice it at first, not until the light from her lantern caught the edge of a thick binder tucked into a compartment welded beneath the seat. She crouched instinctively, tugged it free, and opened it. Inside were handwritten logs, dozens of them, dated from the 1970 through 1985. Each one signed off by the same person, Lieutenant Colonel John R. Turner, her father. The entries were clinical. Observations, readings, notations of temperature fluctuations, structural shifts, and what he repeatedly referred to only as the device. But the tone changed over time. The early notes were technical, the later ones personal, desperate, even. The 12th of July 1984, the signal doesn't stop, even when disconnected. It's not broadcasting, it's responding. But to what? August 2, attempted shutdown failed. Lights off, but core still active. Sealed room 17, recommendation to command. Abandon site. Final note: if Grace finds this, it means I was right. Don't trust the systems. The device is not dead. It's waiting. Her hands trembled as she turned the final page. The last entry was different. It wasn't dated. It was a message. Sweetheart, if you ever come here, I'm sorry. I didn't want this for you. But I had no choice. We were caretakers, not engineers. We never understood it. Only how to keep it quiet. If it wakes up, leave. Don't follow the signal. Please. Grace closed the binder. The silence in the room pressed in again. She had only one thought. Get back to the control chamber. She had to shut everything down, or at least try. She retraced her steps through the narrow tunnel, her breath echoing in sharp bursts. When she reached the command room again, the terminal was no longer static. It was waiting for her. A new message glowed on the screen. Grace Turner. Recognized. Protocol. Override. Awake. Do you wish to initiate response? Y divided by N. She stared at the blinking cursor. This wasn't a recording. It wasn't a playback from the past. The system was active live, and it was asking her what to do. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed. Then the screen blinked again on its own. You're not alone. The overhead light dimmed. The terminal made a sound soft, almost like breathing. Then, from the tunnel behind her, a soft, metallic echo. Not footsteps, something else. Grace turned slowly. The air thick, with a presence she couldn't name. She wasn't sure what had woken up, but it was already moving. Grace didn't breathe. She didn't move. The sound behind her, faint, metallic, deliberate, echoed through the silent chamber like a dropped wrench in a cathedral. It wasn't just footsteps. It wasn't human. It was the sound of intent, something moving not by accident, but with direction, purpose. She turned back toward the terminal, her heart slamming against her ribs. The screen was still pulsing, cursor blinking beneath the words, "You're not alone." The hum of the machine grew louder, rising in a low frequency she could feel in her teeth. And then the screen flashed again, not text this time, but an image. Grainy, faint, a man's face. Her father. Not a photo, not a still frame. A video feed. He sat where she sat now, at the same terminal, same lighting, but different time decades ago. The video had been recorded in low light, and his eyes looked tired, his face drawn. But even in the distortion, she recognized him instantly. He leaned forward. Grace. She felt her knees weaken. Her fingers curled into fists against the desk. "If this is playing," he said, "then the seal's broken. Room 17 is open. I hoped it'd be someone else, but part of me knew it'd be you." He paused, jaw tightening. The man in the video didn't look afraid, he looked resigned, as though he'd spent years knowing this moment might come and dreading it all the same. "I told them it needed to be buried, decommissioned, erased, but they couldn't let it go. Said it was part of the next frontier, that it could predict patterns, read signals, guide action. I think it was never supposed to be found." Grace swallowed hard. The hum in the room deepened. "The object isn't from here. We never confirmed what it was, where it came from. But it talks, Grace. Not in words, in thoughts, frequencies, pulses. It started small dreams, headaches. Then, knowing things you shouldn't. Things that hadn't happened yet." He looked down at something on his desk, then back up at the lens. "It learns. Not like a machine, like a child, observing, growing. We thought we were studying it, but it was studying us." The video glitched slightly, but the feed resumed. "There's more buried below this facility. A deeper level. I tried to lock it down, but the fail-safes were compromised years ago. If it's still active, you need to leave, Grace. Lock it down. Burn the entry if you have to." Another pause. His voice lowered to a whisper. "If it reaches a signal carrier, a person, it doesn't let go. And if it speaks through you, it's already too late." The screen flickered violently, then cut to black. The humming stopped. Grace stood there, breath ragged, staring at the reflection of her own face in the blank screen. Her father had looked directly into the camera when he spoke those last words. "If it speaks through you," behind her, a door slammed. Not a memory, not a recording. Real. Grace spun, lantern raised, but the tunnel was empty. Then, somewhere deeper down the corridor, room 17's heavy door creaked. Not fully open, just enough to invite. The faint red lights had shifted. One was blinking now, not random. A pattern. 3 short pulses. One long, then silence. She didn't know Morse code, but she knew a pattern when she saw one. The device wasn't asleep anymore. It was calling someone. Maybe her. Grace didn't return to room 17 right away. Her instinct screamed against it, her father's words echoing through her head. "It talks. It learns. If it speaks through you, it doesn't let go." Whatever was behind that glass, whatever had pulsed its way through the bunker's silence, wasn't passive anymore. It was awake and aware. She needed answers. Now, back at the command terminal, she tapped through the interface, diving deeper into the archive directories. The system responded slower this time, as if struggling against corrupted files or something more deliberate, a kind of internal resistance. But eventually, she found it. Project file. Red echo. Security override accepted. Beginning archival playback. The screen went black. Then, A title card in stark white letters. Department of Unified Defense. Classified report. BRX 7717. Project Red Echo. Internal use only. A voice began to narrate. Male, crisp, official. Not her father. A government handler, probably. The tone was detached, clinical, as though reading facts he didn't understand. In 1961, a U.S. Geological Survey team operating outside Dry Hollow, Nevada, registered anomalous seismic activity beneath a non-volcanic region. Subsurface imaging revealed a man-made structure at a depth of 180 feet, composed of materials inconsistent with known domestic or foreign construction. Grace leaned closer. Initial excavation was authorized under Operation Lockwell. The object was uncovered in January 1960. Two standing upright, untouched by time, sealed in a cavern that predated local strata. A grainy photo appeared. Men in heavy gear surrounding the same black-ribbed cylinder she'd seen through the glass. Back then, it had looked just as alien, out of place against pickaxes and portable generators. No entry point was found. Surface scans revealed internal complexity, inconsistent with any known engineering. The object emitted pulses, at regular intervals 6.1 seconds apart, on frequencies that interfered with both analog and digital systems. Grace felt a chill run through her. The site was sealed and constructed over with Bunker 17, later renamed Echo Facility 1. The object was designated Red Echo. A containment team was assigned indefinitely. Over the next 2 decades, personnel reported increasingly erratic psychological behavior. Symptoms included insomnia, compulsive dreaming, paranoia, and auditory hallucinations, particularly in individuals with long exposure to the vault chamber. The screen shifted again this time, to handwritten documents, typed memos, and psychiatric evaluations. One caught her eye. Subject: Turner, J.R. recommendation. Temporary leave denied. Exhibiting signs of obsession. Claims he can feel intent from the object. Refuses reassignment. Threatened to seal the vault himself if command would not. Her throat tightened. The narrator continued. All transmission records indicate the object is not a broadcaster, but a listener. Attempts to jam its signal failed. Power disruptions only delayed pulse cycles. In 1985, Project Red Echo was deemed unstable. Orders were issued to dismantle the site. The order was never executed. The screen paused. Then, no further recordings. Last logged access. John R. Turner. Date: July 15, 1985. Terminal note. Vault sealed by Turner without command approval. Grace sat back in the chair, breath shallow. Her father had gone rogue. He didn't just guard this place. He disobeyed orders to shut it down. He'd sealed it himself, walked away, carried the weight of it into silence, and left only a dog tag and a code behind. But now she was here, and the thing he'd tried to contain was listening again. Somewhere down the corridor, the red pulse flickered. 3 short, 1 long. She could feel it in her chest now, not like sound, but vibration. Like it wasn't waiting to be discovered, it was waiting to be understood. Grace couldn't stay at the terminal any longer. Her fingers itched to keep digging, to scour every file for more traces of her father's notes, but her body told her something else. Move. The longer she sat, the more she felt it, a hum, low and resonant, like standing beside a transformer too long. Not a sound. A pressure. She grabbed the binder she'd found earlier and her lantern, then turned toward the corridor beyond the control room, a smaller offshoot she hadn't explored yet. The emergency lights were weaker here, some flickering, others dead entirely. Dust lay undisturbed across the floor, save for a faint trail, the kind made by boots long ago. The passage ended at a door marked simply, Observation Quarters. Personnel. Turner. Her breath caught. The handle turned with a rusty creak. Inside, the room was small. Spartan: a cot, a desk, a steel locker, and a single overhead light that buzzed before finally clicking on. This was where her father had lived, maybe for years, A personal space, hidden deep underground, in a place no one was supposed to know existed. She stepped inside slowly, half expecting the air to still carry his scent. But it didn't. It smelled of paper, old metal and time. The desk drawer stuck at first, but she forced it open. Inside were notebooks, matchbooks, a dull pocket knife, and a single tape recorder with a handwritten label, Log 47, Watchman's Record. She sat on the cot, heart racing, and pressed play. His voice, her father's, emerged through static, tired but sharp. If you're hearing this, I've either failed or you're standing where I once did, asking the same questions. Doesn't matter anymore. I've left what I can. A long pause. Then, I stayed longer than I should have. Every day the signal pulses, not strong, not loud, but constant. It seeps into the systems, into your thoughts. I started dreaming things I couldn't explain. Maps I'd never seen. Languages I don't speak. At first, I thought it was stress. But the dreams began syncing with real events. Power outages, seismic readings, even the Challenger data delay. It knew. Somehow, it knew. Grace leaned forward, barely breathing. We called ourselves watchmen, but we were prisoners. Volunteers at first. Then the replacements stopped coming. Command went silent. Phones stopped working. Mail never arrived. Eventually, it was just me, keeping logs, holding the vault shut. The tape clicked for a moment, then resumed. I started to believe it wanted me to stay, like it needed someone to listen to it, like it couldn't think unless someone was here to receive the thought, and once I started listening, another pause. Then softer. That's when I stopped knowing which thoughts were mine. Grace closed her eyes. It was worse than she imagined. Her father hadn't just been a caretaker. He'd been a vessel, maybe even a buffer between that thing and the rest of the world. If you're my daughter, Grace, I'm sorry. I wanted to burn this place, but I couldn't. Maybe part of me didn't want to. Maybe I already belonged to it. But if you still have your mind run, don't listen too long. Don't open the inner vault. Don't try to understand it. A final click. Then silence. She sat there for a long time, listening not just to the quiet of the room, but to something deeper, a subtle, rhythmical vibration in the walls. 6.1 seconds apart. A pulse, like a heartbeat, like breath. She rose. Outside the quarters, the red emergency lights had dimmed again, and somewhere far below her feet, deeper than the sealed rooms, deeper than the corridors her father ever logged, the real vault was waking up. Grace moved with urgency now, guided less by logic and more by instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive through grief, storms, and the silence her father left behind. The watchman's log played on a loop in her mind, especially the last line, "Don't open the inner vault." But the truth settled in her chest like lead. It had already begun to open. She returned to the main corridor, pushing deeper than before, past the doors she hadn't dared test. Dust clung to the soles of her boots. The lights here were darker, sparser. The blue emergency strip along the wall had begun flickering in erratic bursts, like it was struggling against something it couldn't explain. At the far end of the corridor, she found it Wing B. The door was different from the rest, welded shut with thick seams and reinforced with an iron crossbar. Across it, spray-painted in a hurried scrawl, someone had written, "Sealed by order of command. Do not unseal." And beneath it, scratched into the metal by hand, "This isn't a vault. It's a mouth." Grace stared at that line for a long time. Her lantern flickered. The hum in the walls was louder here. Not a sound, not quite. A feeling, like pressure, barely held back. Like breath, caught between teeth. She knew she shouldn't, but she reached for the crowbar strapped to her pack. The welds had aged. With time and force they gave way, not cleanly but enough. The metal screamed in protest, the sound sharp and alive in the silence. With each pull, each wrenching groan of metal, the hum beneath her feet grew stronger, almost eager. Finally, with one last twist, the iron bar snapped free. The The door didn't swing open. It relaxed, as if something on the other side had been waiting. Grace stepped inside. What met her was not a hallway or bunker chamber. It was stone, ancient, uneven, and cold. The metal walls of the facility stopped at the threshold. Everything beyond had been carved, hollowed, built not by engineers, but by something older, or at least older in thought. The tunnel curved downward, impossibly smooth in places, jagged in others, and along the walls, symbols, not letters, not numbers, patterns, spirals, grids, loops repeating, morphing, like someone had tried to write in logic itself. She passed beneath an arch, etched with strange markings, and into a chamber, circular, tall, its ceiling too high for her lantern to reach, and at its center, built directly into the floor, was a platform. On it sat another structure, smaller than the first one behind the glass, but similar in shape. Cylindrical, smooth, black, except this one wasn't dormant. It pulsed. Every 6.1 seconds, a soft light glowed from its seams red, then violet, then back to dark. The floor beneath it was cracked, as if it had grown from the stone itself. Or perhaps it had melted it. Grace approached, knees weak, sweat cold on her skin. On the edge of the platform was a small device, rectangular, metal, covered in dust. A receiver of some kind. Her father's initials were etched into the corner. J.R.T. She lifted it, and the screen flickered alive. A message, "Do not listen." It blinked. Once. Then, "But you already have." The light from the object brightened. Not blinding, but inviting. It pulsed in time with her heart. Or maybe it was the other way around. She stepped back, and the pulse followed her. Grace wasn't just seeing it anymore. She was feeling it. The signal wasn't just sound or light. It was thought, and it had found a host. Grace fled the chamber like it was breathing down her neck. She didn't remember dropping the device, but it was no longer in her hand. Her footsteps pounded against ancient stone and rusted steel alike, echoing through the winding tunnel of Wing B, through the breached seal and back into the crumbling veins of the facility above. The hum had changed. It wasn't faint anymore. It was alive, insistent, like it had tasted her thoughts, and now wanted more. She didn't slow until she reached a side passage she'd passed earlier. The door was unmarked, slightly ajar, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she slipped inside and closed it behind her. Silence. The humming dimmed instantly, as if the room itself muffled it. She leaned back against the cold metal, trying to catch her breath. That's when she noticed the ticking. Dozens of clocks, wall to wall. It was a small room, rectangular, lined with shelves that held nothing but analog clocks of all sizes, mantelpieces, pocket watches, massive station timers. Some were pristine, others rusted and cracked, but all shared one thing in common. They were frozen. Each one showed the same time, 3 hours, 19 minutes, and 7 seconds. She stepped forward, lantern raised. The ticking wasn't coming from the clocks, it was coming from speakers in the ceiling. A recorded ticking, manufactured, looped, playing in sync with the 6.1-second pulse that now throbbed faintly in her skull. She picked up a small brass watch from a shelf. Its hands were motionless, but when she flipped it over, there was a message scratched into the metal. Time fractures where the mind folds. She put it down quickly. On the far wall hung a corkboard covered in faded pages, incident reports, drawings, even pages torn from journals. Some were handwritten. One looked like it was scrawled in the dark, the ink smeared, as if the writer was trembling. Temporal echoes are stacking. Memory loops are forming. Clocks stopped when containment failed. They stopped when he went inside. Another note was pinned beneath it. Do not enter room 19. Do not wear a watch inside. Grace's mouth went dry. There was no room 19 on any of the schematics she'd seen. But she was no longer sure what was real, or what the place ever truly contained. Time wasn't behaving normally here. The clocks weren't dead, they were suspended, frozen at the exact moment something happened. Something massive, and maybe irreversible. She moved to leave, but her lantern flickered again, not from battery loss, from interference. On the shelf beside her, one of the clocks, a red plastic model from the 1970 seconds, began to tick. Just once. Tick. Then silence. Then, through the speakers, the same voice from before. Grace. She froze. You opened the gate. The others listened too. They never left. A different voice now. Hers. I'm still here. Her hand flew to her mouth. It was her voice. Not recorded. Not remembered. Not imagined. A live echo from somewhere she hadn't been yet. The clocks didn't move again. But Grace did. Because if the voice she heard was her own, then this place wasn't showing her the past. It was showing her what came after. Grace bolted from the clock room, her footsteps echoing too loud, too close. The door slammed behind her with a metallic clang that rang through the corridor like a starting gun. But no one followed. At least, no one she could see. She pressed a hand to the wall, grounding herself. The hallway was dim now, bathed in the flickering red emergency lights. The backup systems were failing. Or maybe they weren't failing at all. Maybe something else was overriding them. Her thoughts were scattered, like radio signals crossing wires. She remembered the voice. Her voice coming through the speaker. Not a playback. A loop. A signal bending time like heat over pavement. Grace made her way back to the central command chamber, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The hum in the walls had shifted. Before, it had been like pressure. Now, it was more like presence. A vibration inside her bones, as if her heartbeat was syncing to something not hers. She stood at the main terminal, but the screen was no longer blue. It was black, save for a single blinking cursor. A moment later, text began to type, not in green or white like before, but in soft red. Signal. Accepted. She stepped back instinctively. Transmission in progress. Receiver. Live. Carrier. Grace Turner. Her pulse skyrocketed. She slammed the power switch on the side of the terminal. Nothing. The screen blinked once, then slowly changed. Receiver interrupt. Failed. Protocol. Integration initiated. No, she said aloud, reaching for the wires at the back of the console. She ripped them loose, sparks jumping. The lights above flickered violently. Somewhere in the facility, a speaker came to life with a burst of static. And then came the voices. Not one. Not even a few. Hundreds. Whispers. Layered on top of each other, speaking in tones that weren't quite language, but not noise either. Like memory trying to speak. Like time trying to fold in on itself. She clutched her head as the speakers all around her echoed at once, overlapping messages spilling across the room like overlapping lives. Signal breach. We were warned. Turner wasn't the first. Grace. Grace. Listen, she screamed. Not out of fear, out of desperation, and just like that silence, the terminal was off. The speakers dead. The hum ceased. A beat passed. 2. And then the radio in the far corner, the old shortwave set her father had once logged communications on, crackled to life. A single transmission. Clear. Steady. Grace Turner. If you're hearing this, leave immediately. They've locked onto your thoughts. Her father's voice. This isn't containment anymore. It's translation. The signal doesn't need a device. It needs you. You're the transmitter now. The line went dead. Grace stumbled back, heart pounding so loud it felt like another echo. She turned to the glass window behind her, the one overlooking room 17. The black device inside pulsed red. Once. Twice. And then she saw it. Movement. Inside the sealed chamber, something shifted beneath the surface of the object. Not mechanical. Not metal. Organic. Like something within had finally turned its head, and it was facing her. The thing inside the glass was no longer just pulsing, it was watching. Grace didn't know how she knew that. She just did. The same way animals know when they're being hunted. The same way silence becomes heavy before a storm. Inside room 17, the object, the device, the signal source, had begun to shift. Not with mechanical precision, but with something disturbingly fluid. Veins of red light pulsed beneath its surface like bioluminescence under dark water. Something moved within it now, a ripple, like muscle tensing beneath skin. Grace staggered back from the glass. On the radio, static snapped again, followed by a fragment of her father's voice. They don't think in time. They think in layers. The signal is folded. You hear it now, but it's already been sent. The shortwave fell silent. Then the terminal blinked back to life. The red text returned. Carrier link established. Receiver active. Response imminent. Grace turned to the door, ready to run, but the chamber vibrated violently. The lights above flickered and blew out with a pop, sending sparks across the console. The power grid was failing, or being rewritten. A sudden tone pierced the air high, sharp, and bone-deep. It didn't hurt her ears. It bypassed them entirely. She felt it in her teeth, in the backs of her eyes. Her knees buckled, palms pressed to the floor. From behind the glass, the object's light throbbed harder, faster, the frequency accelerating. The whispers returned, but this time, not from the speakers, from inside her. Her own thoughts weren't alone anymore. Don't run. You opened the way. Now you must carry it forward. No, Grace whispered, shaking her head violently, digging her nails into her scalp as if that could push the voices out. You're not mine. But the thoughts answered her, like an echo from her own mind. I am not yours. You are mine. She scrambled toward the exit, hand slamming the emergency release panel. The command door hissed open barely, just wide enough to squeeze through. Behind her, the terminal lit up one last time. Transmission complete. Then it shut down for good. Grace sprinted down the corridor, the structure groaning all around her as if the very bunker was reacting. Pipes banged above. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep within the sealed wing B, something let out a low, guttural hum like metal being bent by will alone. She reached the base of the access stairs. Above her, the hatch, the original hatch, still open. As she climbed, each step seemed harder not from weight, but from something trying to hold her back, like her body wanted to stop. Knees locking, breath shortening, mind clouding. Integration, the terminal had said. Receiver. Grace Turner. Someone else was listening now. And it wasn't just her. As she pulled herself through the final hatch, into the dusty air of the shed, she heard it again, her own voice, deep below, faint through the static of a buried speaker. I'm still here. Grace slammed the shed door shut behind her, locking the old latch with shaking hands. The wind outside was dry and harsh, but it felt cleaner than anything she'd breathed in hours. She staggered back a few steps and collapsed to the ground, dust billowing around her. The desert stretched out in every direction, quiet and empty. But something inside her wasn't quiet anymore. The hum had stopped. At least she couldn't hear it, not with her ears. But deep in her bones, in the corners of her thoughts, it remained. A memory that hadn't happened yet. A whisper curled around something ancient and wordless. She opened the notebook she'd taken from her father's quarters. Its pages were brittle. The final entry now felt less like a warning and more like a passing of the torch. If she finds this, she'll know the truth. We never built it. We never understood it. But it knew her name. Grace stared at those words until the ink blurred with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The shed behind her was just rusted metal and broken boards again. But beneath it, the signal was waiting not in cables or transmitters, but in her. She could run, but the signal would run with her. Still, it hadn't taken her. Not yet. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. Her father had sealed it once. Maybe she could find a way to do the same or better. For now, she walked away from the shed without looking back. Whatever had been buried beneath the dust, she wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the last keeper of a legacy no one remembered. and the first voice it had truly chosen to hear.